If I may, I'd like to have you take a moment, picture a refugee. Hold on to this image. We'll come back to it. As tools of rhetoric, numbers can be useful things. To stir up his base, a politician might falsely declare that thousands of dangerous migrants are marching towards our border. Elsewhere, you might be informed that while there were upwards of 4,000 people walking towards the United States, the overwhelming majority of them were women, children, and men who were fleeing violence, persecution, and extreme economic hardship. Numbers can be useful tools as fear-mongering, tearing apart vulnerable families while making those who have less feel like outcasts. Numbers can also inform us about those who we've kept on the outskirts. What numbers will never do is explain why a mother would send her son alone across the desert, or why a father who cannot swim would climb into a raft while holding his infant child. What numbers cannot do, storytelling in its finest form can. But the way that a story is told is just as important as the story itself. It's good. For those of us who have the luxury of looking at the migration crises through the cold, distant lens of numbers in a headline, it's difficult for us to wrap our heads around the realities that many have. But these are realities for some, even if it's not the realities of their entire lives. We hear often about the migration crisis. We are told that many flee their homes, their loved ones, their doorways, travel for miles to arrive in a place where they must tell their stories to people who speak a different tongue. We're told they must shirk the stigma of being seen as another simply because they worship, speak, eat, dance, taste, or love slightly differently than we do. We're told, and we see images of children playing in refugee camps, attempting to find some semblance of normalcy while praying of being resettled in pastel-colored bedrooms of their own. And we see images of lines of asylum seekers trailing from one border denial until the next. But we rarely see what can come afterwards. What becomes of those who arrive despite it all? Those who dare to dream, those who hear of an American dream despite what languages they speak, those who become our neighbors. We hear rarely about the dreams of the children who wake thinking of an America. I'm fortunate to be here in front of you because of my collaborations with migrants, displaced people, and asylum seekers from across the globe. With my ongoing project After Migration, I've spoken with individuals who've traveled, who've persevered, and who've transgressed and nevertheless persevered at the end. Using fashion design as culturally representative, using film, using portraiture, and using interviews with individuals who've been behind borders, over waters, and through deserts, we produce portraiture and imagery that works to dispel stereotypes and biases many of us hold against these individuals. And more importantly, these portraits are designed to instill a sense of pride amongst individuals who've seen themselves displayed too often as less than. And so these people who we refer to as migrants, as refugees, are never shown as weak. They're never shown as despondent. They're never shown as victims of their circumstances. Instead, they're shown as strong. They're shown as triumphant. They're shown as figures of pride, despite it all. In short, they're shown as nuanced human beings who love and hope just as any of us do, just as any of us would hope to be seen, regardless of our circumstances. Because none of us is comprised by our weakest, lowest, and harshest moments. All of us see beyond the clouds. because that's how we get out of bed in the morning. There are thankfully numerous organizations, individuals, many of us in this room, who work in the area of supporting migrants and telling stories about migrants. Very often, many of us are so consumed by doing the hard and necessary and laudable work of saving lives that we neglect to do the careful and beautiful work of explaining why these lives are worthy of being saved. And so we get comfortable and we fall back on creating image after image that does little to draw people in, but instead pushes us away. Images of suffering, images of ongoing trauma, images of depression, images that make us feel numb because as viewers and as an audience, there's little we can do, little we think we can do to stem the tide. My approach is different. I think that while what others do may be honest and well-meaning, it's incomplete. Too often, we have a reductive approach to showing those who've suffered. We define them entirely as the scope of their difficult journeys without mentioning the beauty and the range of life that they experience. We forget to mention the joys, the bedtime stories on the trail, the hopes of beyond, the waiting warm bed that they will arrive in. We forget to remind them and us that they are human. And so with this work, if there's anything I'd offer you about the way I choose to approach stories, it's to always remember that regardless of wherever the frame is pointed, there is grace to be found. You just have to look long enough. My work seeks to place its participants at the forefront. Their narratives take the forefront of what we speak about because it's their voices. They tell me how they hope to be seen. They discuss their hopes, their dreams, their passions, what brings them across the waves, importantly, what they have to offer. They're not defined by being open hands that need help. They have things to bring, things to contribute. And I think that for us, it's important to realize that very easily, any of us could be any of them. Any of them could be any of us. Indeed, the separation is one of fate and randomness. And so, I think if there's anything I'd ask you to do is to think about the idea that no matter where tragedy strikes at any of our addresses, wherever we are on the globe, the ability to have integrity, sophistication, grace, regality is something that travels with us wherever we seek to find refuge, wherever we seek to call home. And regardless of how high, how far, or how wide we build border walls, they can never confine the beauty that lies within any of us. And so I think I would ask you guys again to take a moment to picture a refugee. Do you see someone who is beautiful? If not, perhaps you should stop and look again. Thank you.